Welcome to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast, presented by FantasyGolfBag.com, your number one source for the most in-depth PGA Tour analysis in the daily fantasy and sports betting world. Each week, our experts will discuss everything you need to know, from the course preview and key stats to top plays, fades, and strategies. Whether golf betting, grinding out cash games, or playing for a big GPP win, our team has you covered. Let's get after it.
Welcome to a special edition of the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I am Axis, and today, instead of doing the usual run-through DraftKings style pod for the upcoming European Tour event, Sky and I had the great opportunity to talk to Dylan Beirne, who is an analyst at the 15th Club. If you haven't heard of the 15th Club, or if you have and you're kind of figuring out why, they were talked about extensively during the Ryder Cup and the lead up to the Ryder Cup, and then the victory for the European team in France, and how the analytical team at the 15th Club helped from behind the scenes as far as picking players to fit the course and just overall assisting in that. And they're continuing to do that, and as well as for the President's Cup. So we didn't really dabble into any of that. You will just have to wait and see. And if you don't already follow Dylan on Twitter, you can find him at Dylan_Beirne. That's DYLAN_BEIRNE. And hopefully you enjoy the episode this week. So I would like to welcome on to the podcast Dylan Beirne. He is joining us from across the pond in Ireland, staying up late to talk some Euro golf with us this week. Dylan, thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me on. Happy to talk golf any time of the day.
Yeah, right. So we brought you on today. The PGA Tour has had their FedEx Cup, and they're winding down swing season. So now the Euro Tour Race to Dubai coming to an end. And we really just kind of wanted to go over the season briefly, especially with some of these younger golfers that some of us have fallen in love with the playing on a fantasy end and a gambling end for most of the season. For Sky and I, it started with Guido Migliozzi back at the magical Kenya Open. And unfortunately, he hasn't really pulled himself along as well as some of these other guys like a McIntyre and a Victor Perez. So I just wanted to start off, maybe getting your thoughts on how do you guys at 15th Club maybe rank these guys, or how do you see them going forward, or, sophomore slump, who's in for the worst of it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an exciting time for not just Europeans, I guess, but, for the kind of younger players in the European Tour. So you touched on a couple of the names there, but there's a few even like, Van Rooyen and Bezuidenhout who have been around a little bit longer, but they're, I suppose they've kind of had a proper breakout maybe this year. So, yeah, I mean, from last week, we saw the potential of Matthias Schwab and obviously Victor Perez. So two of them having what we ranked as their best ever event performances in terms of like adjusting for strength of field and everything. So I kind of had a look at, the first thing I looked at was like who has the highest peak of these players. So when they've played their best, who has had the best performance in an event. So that actually, of the kind of those breakout guys, it turned out to be Bezuidenhout at the BMW PGA. So we had him gaining like 18.8 strokes on the field. Again, that's adjusted for the field strength. So that was actually that was the highest strokes gained, and he also has second, interestingly enough. So I think we can kind of definitively say that Bezuidenhout has got the best game when he's on, and then that's obviously followed by Schwab and Perez last week, and then Schwab again. So I think we kind of get a bit of a picture there of who's the best when they're on, and then kind of having a look at like their overall ranking. So obviously that's kind of one element of them, but to kind of talk a little bit more about like their overall ranking. So we've got Van Rooyen at the top in that element. So we actually rank him pretty similarly to his world ranking. We've got him 58th in the world, and he's 59th at the minute in the OWGR. So for us, he's the he'd be the best of those guys. And then I think another probably another thing to look at is kind of, you touched on like who's in for a slump. I think, from another aspect is kind of who we would expect to maintain and be consistent. So Adri Arnaus is actually, he's had a pretty solid season. He's come a long way. So and a lot of that is on the back of his off the tee ranking. So he's ranked fourth on the European Tour in strokes gained off the tee. But when we adjust for strength of field and apply a couple of other things to it, we actually make him the third best driver in the world this year, which is huge because it's tough to model how a player is going to project forward. But something we've looked at over the last while has generally been how does current performance in different areas impact future performance. So off the tee, probably not a massive surprise to anybody, but that's the most repeatable area. So I guess that's probably why we see Rory and DJ and Ram, they're the best drivers in the world, but that's why it's a little bit more consistent. So I'd expect him to actually be reasonably consistent and kind of push on. Along with him, there's Van Rooyen as well, as 41st in the world in ranking off the tee. And it's kind of been, that's a bit of a theme across these guys, which is really promising, I think. So Van Rooyen's 41st, Guido 73rd, Kitayama 83rd, McIntyre 39th, and Perez 33rd. So to be honest, I think I could really see all of those guys pushing on and kind of maintaining their form or getting better. Even for somebody like Guido, he's probably, in terms of his performance, he's potentially it sounds harsh, but he's probably the worst of those good guys. But a lot of that has come from his putting. So he's lost on average over a stroke per round on the greens this year.
Just so bad.
Yeah, but putting is by its nature cyclical. So if he was, if you were looking at somebody who's gaining a stroke on the greens, I'd be more inclined to say they're potentially in for a slump. Whereas I think, Guido could just cycle around and he could have a good year putting, and the rest of his game is solid enough that he could have a really solid year, and really push on. So I'm conscious I've been talking for quite a long time now, but that's kind of that's the summary of those guys as we see it from a numbers point of view.
From a perspective, if you say like Bezaden, who was so high from those two individual performances, he's someone, for example, who continually does well around the green and on the green. From the contrary, do you project people that maybe their ball striking isn't to a degree of someone like Arnaus, but has had those type of finishes? How do you revert that on the opposite side? Would you expect that to be closer to the mean over time and his performances are more of outliers, or just his overall game has shown those peak performances at the BMW and at Valderrama that he's proven at those type of courses he can stay?
I think there probably is an element of, I suppose, the way he gains the stroke. So he's actually the best player in the world around the greens this year.
Yep.
He's gained 0.8 of a stroke. So that's obviously been, central to his performances. And then putting, he's been gaining 0.4 of a stroke there. But the ability for him in terms of his putter is, he gets really hot with it, and that tends to be what leads to these really good scores and really good performances. Because you're not going to gain 10 strokes on the field off the tee, but you might well do it on the greens. So that probably ties into why his peak is a little bit higher than everybody else. But yeah, you're absolutely right that on the flip side of that, he's lost half a stroke between off the tee and approach. So that's really not very promising. And like I said about the kind of cyclical nature of putting in the short game, it's tough to be consistently good in that area. We kind of see it all the time from guys like Jason Day. Even at the minute, his putting was brilliant for quite a few years, but it's because it's cyclical, it's very difficult to maintain that over a really long period. So there's a reasonable chance that Bezaden could be one of those that he's got quite a high peak, but he's also it's going to be tougher for him to maintain a consistent performance at a really high level.
Yeah,
I mean, I appreciated, first off, on the first comment too, you did amplify Guido's exceptional ball striking game, and I think it translates a lot to the nature of the European Tour game from the type of event stature that you get. I think we first started our conversation after his Magical Kenya Open win, where at the time I believe you guys had him close to a top 10 ball striker in the world, and you really see these relative players who right now are going through second stage of Q school that may be completely off the radar to now being a household name on that tour. Can you speak a little bit, for those that maybe aren't as familiar with it, kind of the process that people, that golfers, professional golfers, really can get a chance to compete at these high levels, or where these guys were, whether it's Challenge Tour or Alps Tour, these different paths to the European Tour, and how that kind of affects the way they rise to the top? Matt Wallace, great example too, but how you guys kind of see those routes to the elite level on the European Tour.
Yeah, like Matt Wallace's story is obviously it's fantastic. He was playing probably could be like 4 or 5 years ago now. He was playing on the Alps Tour, which would be like, let's say, like the 4th division maybe of European golf. I think there was actually a stage where he was thinking about giving it up, and I heard him telling a good story previously about how he wrote some letters to management companies looking for a job, and the only reason he kept playing was because nobody wrote back to him. So so that worked out well for him. But yeah, like he was playing Alps Tour, and then I guess the transition from Alps Tour is up to the Challenge Tour, which is kind of second division of European golf, and that's where we've seen a lot of these guys coming from. So when we look at like Arnaus, Zadenhout, Van Rooyen, Guido, even Kitayama has played at quite a few events in the Challenge Tour, McIntyre, they've all played 20 plus events on the Challenge Tour on the way. So I mean, like qualifying up, a lot of them they'll get kind of certain chances. So if you're playing on the Challenge Tour, it's somewhat similar to the Corn Ferry Tour as it is now. In that, depending on the event, they'll generally get starts in the European Tour, and then they get some, depending on their finish in the Challenge Tour in the year, they get exemptions into the qualifying school for European Tour, which is actually going on. The second stage is this week. So then there's obviously a second stage and then final qualifying, and then the top players from that end up getting status on the European Tour. So they get varying levels of status depending on where they finish in the final round of qualifying school. So basically where they finish in that depends, or the number of starts they get the following year depends on where they finish in that. So it's a good system in terms of how it, I think it's kind of proven, when we look at these guys and we're talking about, a lot of these guys are now inside the top 100 in the world. So I think it proves that they can transition from there. And these guys are probably quite inspirational, I guess, for some of the, people playing the Challenge Tour this year, that, you can move on and you can get to significant heights like Schwab and Perez have last week, quality finishes and top quality fields. So, it's a good system, and it seems to be working quite well.
Two amazing things that I find, and I think people are well known to it now, but Brooks Koepka, obviously another one of our absolute favorites, making his way through Challenge Tour, European Tour success to world number one, really grinding his teeth over there. And I think going even to Q School, I mean, last year, Kitayama and Guido started in first stage of Q School, made it all the way through, both two-time winners. Just the magnitude of getting your chance and taking advantage of it is why, I think we follow it so close. And really, I mean, you saw it with Brendan Todd last week in Bermuda, too. Some of these magical stories of people given a chance and really getting to take it to heights. And I know Axis and myself are two that follow more than most, I would say, on the European Tour side. But I'm enamored of the Challenge Tour and everything that comes up with it. And looking at the final there this week, I think we have some huge names on the Challenge Tour that can really make an impact next year. Is there anybody for you of those graduates that you are particularly fond of?
Of the graduates or of the guys that are in
like
the top
current top
of the
10?
Challenge Tour?
I don't know.
Well, I think, the standout guy is obviously Callum Hill. You know, he's kind of proven himself this year. He's one who I'd fully expect that he'll move on and he'll be he may be the Robert McIntyre of next year. You know, he's proven he can win, which is, you know, that's a massive thing. I think we saw that with Matt Wallace coming through, that you know, particularly when he came on the European Tour, that maybe his performances all round weren't quite as good as some other players, but you know, he had that ability when he got in position that he could get the wins. So I mean, that's huge for when you get somebody like Callum Hill. You know, and like I said, I'd expect him next year to be coming through and to you know, to really prove himself on the European Tour. So yeah, I mean, I think he's the standout guy. There's potentially a few other names that we could look at, but yeah, if I had to nail my colours to the mast on one guy, it's not. I'm not exactly going out there with that, but I think he's the guy to watch.
I don't follow the Challenge Tour as much, and they don't really have any stats out there in general for us to follow. But I see Richard Bland sitting in third, and he is pushing 40-ish. Like, does the Challenge Tour have
46?
Oh wow!
Mm-hmm.
So does the Challenge Tour have a lot of guys who are older like that, also pushing to get cards back for the European Tour, or is he kind of a standout guy, just loves golf and is still playing for the love of it?
There's generally a few. I'm just looking through here. I think like Oliver Farr is one of he's kind of been up and down. Yeah, there's generally a few here and there, but I think there's the bulk of them will be, you know, they'll either be guys who are sort of on the way up. So say, like, you know, Callum Hill and Matthew Jordan there. He's another one that's definitely got potential. Yeah, definitely. I think he turned pro, or he was +7 for a while. His handicap was while he was still an amateur, which is just like insane to get to that level is incredible. So, I mean, yeah, there's guys like that who kind of are on the way up, I guess, and then there's kind of I suppose there's a cohort of effectively like kind of career Challenge Tour players. So there's always a few of them who've been you know, sort of generally around that level and kind of bounced around there for quite a while, and then there's, you know, you've got a few peppered in like Richard Bland and Oliver Farr and a few other guys who sort of were European Tour players, maybe dropped down and are trying to get back to where they were. So I think there's a mix of different players. There's a guy actually further down, Lorenzo Scalise, that we've done a little bit of work with him in the past, and he's another Italian for you guys to root for. But I think he's quite an interesting player. I think he's got the potential to move up. He's kind of down. You know, he started off the year on the Alps Tour and the Euro Pro Tour kind of events and that, and he's moved up to Challenge Tour now. But he's one just to keep an eye on. Probably not so much this year, but I'd say next year he could be a potential player that could make his way up the rankings at the Challenge Tour.
Two for me, I really like. I like Rosner. I think he showed his tee to green game multiple times in his European Tour performances. I know Belgian knockout. He was, I think he got knocked out maybe Sweet 16, but performed well. And then the story of Cormac Sharvin too. For those who don't know, he would have been on the European Tour last year had he not teed up. I think it was like on the back nine of the final round of Q School. He teed off on a par 3 just in front of the markers. So it was a 2-stroke penalty, and he had put it to 2 feet, ended up doubling the hole ended up, I think, bogeying the hole instead of birdieing. 2-stroke swing, missed it by a stroke. He came out, I think he top 20'd one of the European Tour events that he played this year with a win, I think at least one win on the Challenge Tour this year. I really like him too, who've shown a little bit of pop on the European Tour too. And then I know for a fact too, I'm going to bet Hugo Leon, I think, in every Challenge Tour event next year, because he was the odd man out on the race to Dubai rankings for the year. He was 116, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate, but I guess somebody has to be down there.
Him and Minwoo Lee. I think Minwoo Lee was the other one right there too.
Yeah, Minwoo Lee, I think, is an affiliate member, so I think he gets some starts through that.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at Rosner here, like looking at his numbers. I mean, it's obviously a limited sample that we have for him, but he's been gaining like 0.3 of a stroke off the tee and zero point 0.3 of a stroke on approach, which, like I said, it's a good combination. They're gaining 0.6, on his long game, which is for somebody playing Challenge Tour at the minute. That's a really positive level to be at. It's just his putting and around the green is losing him 0.7. So, that's, I think, as I've already kind of touched on, but that's the formula that I'd look for long-term performance and improvement. So yeah, you've probably hit the nail on the head with Rosner there. Yeah.
Do you equate at all? And it's a difficult game. I know Axis and myself, when we're talking outrights versus head-to-heads and different style of betting. And, hitting outrights consistently is, one of the more challenging things of anything when it comes to sports handicapping. And we see that, over the course of the year. Do you think, and maybe this is kind of an off-the-grid question, but, a winner mentality, someone like Matt Wallace or Guido who were winning on the Alps Tour, does that, even though the caliber of field is not there, does a victory on other tours, mean something for somebody who can come through on Sunday? Because it's sad to say, but I was looking back and our boy Bob McIntyre never got a win, on the Challenge Tour. It's been a long time since he has had a win in his career, and we still haven't seen him come through with a victory yet on the European Tour. And do you think any of that, success on Sunday is, you talked about pressure ratings or something in regards to time rounds, how does that translate to winning?
Yeah, I guess that's something we're actually working on, I suppose, kind of improving our modeling at the minute of that element of it, because it's like pressure is a different thing for different players. So, if we were looking at the situations and say Rosner may be in this year, there'll be some situations where he'll be under pressure. He'll be within, one or two of the lead and he'd start to feel the pressure. Whereas if you drop another player into that scenario, they may not feel the pressure quite as much. So I think it's all about, like, we need to rank situations in terms of the pressure they apply, if that makes sense. So yes, we're working on that at the minute. So, for example, somebody who has been in a pressure situation relative to their overall situation. So if we take I can't remember the guy's name now, but in Spain, in the Open de España, the local guy.
Del Val.
Yes. Yeah. So, like, in his situation, he would have, that would have been a massive pressure situation for him. So, for me, that would be like a number one ranked situation, if that makes sense. Whereas if you put like John Rahm in that situation, somebody who's kind of, led in majors and different things like that, it's not quite as, it's the same situation, if that makes sense, but it's a totally different scenario. So yeah, we're looking at that at the minute. And I think that will be key to kind of understanding all that is how does the pressure in, the relative pressure in the situation translate. But I think anecdotally, I think it's definitely a massive, we've seen it with, it's a massive impact. Like, we've seen it with Wallace, and with a few other players as well. And that's kind of why I guess I expect Callum Hill to be successful on the European Tour as well, because he's proven that, a win is a win. Because, like I said, for him in the situation when he goes out on Sunday and he's leading, that's the level he's playing at the minute. And if he can go out and, get the job done, we've seen it kind of, and because pretty much weekly we work with European Tour Productions on their coverage of European Tour. So quite a lot of the time we'll, pretty much every week we look at the 54-hole leader and their record across different tours and how they've converted. And again, it's a little bit anecdotal, but we consistently see guys who, even through like Challenge Tour or whatever tour, maybe Asian Tour that they've led on, if they've struggled in the past to get over the line, it's generally not a good sign. And more often than not, you will see it, fall apart and they'll struggle. So, like I said, we're working on kind of improving the modelling of that at the minute. But yeah, it's definitely, I think we we can say pretty definitively that the ability to win is a real factor in a player's game.
So to go off that a little bit, because as you were talking, I kind of went through, like, McIntyre actually, so his fourth round in Denmark and even the British Masters was good. He just got out-dueled by, I mean, Beirne just played that much better relative to the field. So would you consider maybe, and I noticed Bob crapped the bed in Germany in the third round where he got second to Casey. So would you consider maybe, so let's use Robert for an example, going into the third round, playing in the final group for someone like McIntyre who hasn't won in a while, would that be a pressure round that I'm ignoring potentially because I'm only looking at fourth round where he actually played well, but he really lost it for himself on the third round?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think there's, as part of that kind of ranking of situations, I think, round three probably needs to be looked at a little bit differently to round four. In terms of it is a pressure situation, but it's obviously not as pressurized as a Sunday. But having a look at, I'll just pull it up here. So McIntyre's, so we've got I did some crude pressurized situations here. So in his high pressure rounds, so the way I've kind of looked at it is relative to what we would have expected them to do. So we've got obviously rankings and ratings for players, and we kind of measure the change in their performance based on, is he better or worse than we would expect him to be on average in these rounds. Now we've got 4 high pressure rounds and 3 sort of medium pressure rounds, if that makes sense. And of those, he's averaged 0.7 strokes per round better in the high pressure rounds and 1.5 strokes better in the pressure rounds. So it kind of looks like he's he's performed fine, I think,
just running
in the pressure situation.
Hot golfers,
I think so. I think that's it. But again, I suppose it's sometimes you just need to be, when you're in that situation, if the other guy's hot, you just need to be hotter, I guess, and that's probably part of the winning mentality. And that's probably something I don't think we'll ever really be able to quantify that as such. We can always talk about, do they get better or do they get worse in the key situations, but the level that some players get to when they're Danny Willett is a good example of somebody who, when we look at his pressure rounds, his high pressure rounds is just, it's insane. He ups his game massively. It's 2.5 strokes per round. He gets better when he's within 2 of the lead, I think, over the weekend. So he's a good example of somebody who just turns it on, and it's it's always going to be tough to predict that, I guess. But I think that's.
We just need McIntyre to get away from Beirne. Beirne got him twice this year with us. So.
Yeah, I mean, we talk to players quite a lot about, I suppose focusing on it's become a bit of a cliche at this stage, but focusing on the process. So we talk a lot about focusing on the performance and the underlying performance. It kind of flies in the face a little bit of some of what I said already, but if a player is Matt Fitzpatrick is a good example of somebody who recently has struggled a little bit to get over the line. He's had, I think, 5 second place finishes this year, and quite a lot of top 10s. He's playing really, really well, but he just hasn't got the win yet. But he's a player who we'd always just say you should just focus on the positives, and the performances are there, and the win will come. And McIntyre is one of those who I kind of would say that about, that his performances have been there. He's the most consistent of these guys. So his worst round is the best relative to everybody else, if you get me. So he's had the best worst event.
Yeah.
If you get me. So he's the most consistent of the younger guys coming through. So I think it's a matter of time with him, I guess.
But what about those potentially, to the degree, not even the younger guys, but those that may be now challenging, going from the European Tour to playing on the PGA Tour? I think 2 that we saw that had the special temporary membership was Wallace, who excelled in some examples, and then one of our favorites, Bjerregaard, absolutely lost his game since he's come to start playing on the PGA Tour. Is there anybody from that degree in the upper echelon that you see making a successful transition to the PGA Tour in the next calendar year here in 2020 that we can be early on for?
I think McIntyre has the potential to do that. I think he could definitely do that. I think Van Rooyen is probably the one that I'd be watching most closely. There's obviously you generally find an edge in situations with, I think you guys probably noticed as well, but McIntyre this year for the Open was you get some good prices on it because I suppose the majority of people who are probably having bets on the Open aren't generally, familiar with what's happening kind of week to week on the European Tour. So I think Van Rooyen's success, it's good to see him getting the win as well. So, I could definitely see him doing well in the States. He's got a solid game. He's kind of broadly similar, I think, in his breakdown in terms of strokes gained to Louis Oosthuizen, in that he's a good driver, okay to good approach player, and a really good putter. So I think that kind of breakdown is solid. I think the putting will be cyclical as well. So the fact that he's a good putter is positive in a way that I'd expect his good weeks to be really good. I think the wins could be there. There's been some positive signs already. I think the PGA, I don't know where he finished in the end. I think he might have been 8th. And he was, I think I remember looking earlier on the year, he was like one good finish away from getting special temporary membership as well, on the PGA, or he might have actually got it, but he was right around that level. So yeah, I could definitely see him making the move over, especially having had the success at Bethpage. So yeah, I could see that working. So he could be one to keep an eye on. I don't know what the feeling is on him in the States at the minute, but there'll be a lot of positive signs on him.
I think those who follow some Euro Tour are very aware of Van Rooyen, but I think he is someone who maybe the casual, on a DraftKings or a FanDuel type thing can maybe take advantage of in the lower stakes for, I don't know, a month. I mean, we played McIntyre for a while, even in just European events before he started becoming popular and a weekly fixture, if you will, in even the upper stakes. I mean, we were playing him. Sometimes we were the only guys using him in tournaments. So I think if you pay attention enough, like you said, you can find a little bit of an edge, even if it's only for a week or two, but sometimes that's all you need to hit.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said about Van Rooyen, I mean, I could definitely see him going over to the States at some point in the next year and winning an event because, he's got the potential there. The game is there off the tee and the putting can just get really hot. So, it could be that he just goes over and wins. So could definitely see that. Victor Perez is obviously another one as well. I think, anytime we ever see a performance like that, like we did last week from Schwab and Perez, is just such a massive positive in terms of your expectations for a player because, it becomes much more apparent that we know the ability is there and kind of, when we look at the distributions of scoring and ability, we know that the potential is there for them to have a really good week. But when they do it in the right situation, I think it's, and similar to what I said about Van Rooyen at the PGA, I think just seeing them putting in a really good performance in the right, the right situation is really, really important.
Yeah, for sure. Sky, unless you have anything else on the year that has been, we can transition into the end of the year here with the race to Dubai starting in Turkey.
I mean, we could have probably a 12-hour conversation with Dylan here about the past year, but no, I mean, I'm enamored at a lot of these things, and I know many of those listening in the industry have really loved, the European Tour and the focus that it's had. So I appreciate, shedding the light here on what the year has been, but also excited to see, what we have here in the next 4 weeks ahead of us. It's just as big of a time, from what it was for the Tour Championship here. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on Turkey and beyond.
I mean, I love this time of year because, I love this time of year because it's obviously, it's the culmination of a season. So I guess it's probably for some of the players, it's the most pressurized time of year. So obviously in Portugal, we saw the guys who are fighting to keep their cards. So it's, there's obviously an added element to that. It's not just a kind of standard event. And then when we come into these kind of smaller field events, we see some of the bigger names coming back in. So we get a good chance to compare sort of where, the likes of McIntyre, I guess, and Perez and Schwab and the rest of the guys, sort of see where they are in relation to the Roses and the McIlroys of the world, in the European Tour situation. So, it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks.
So speaking of that, this week we go to a course that hasn't been played since 2015. So I know there aren't too many advanced statistics as far as strokes gained data for the course this week.
I think for this week we haven't got a huge amount, obviously because the last time it was played here was before we collected the shot by shot data on the European Tour. So obviously we don't have strokes gained or anything like that, but we have a certain amount of information in terms of basic stats. So like the scrambling and missed fairway penalty. So at this course the missed fairway penalty is higher than average, which is, I guess it's not a huge amount higher, but when we look at some of the other elements, so it tends to yield a lot of birdies. So you need to go really low here to win, or to even compete. I think -20 was like tied third or something last time here. So, you need to go low, and to do that, you need to hit the fairway. So that's kind of key. I think there's three holes that the missed fairway penalty is more than half a stroke. So,
wow.
You're going to need to be hitting the fairway around here quite consistently. On the flip side, actually scrambling is a little bit easier. So it's kind of like, closer to 60% as opposed to like low 50s on average in the European Tour. So, we can kind of, I think there's potential that some of the short game specialists might suffer a little bit from that. So I think basically if you're looking for a player who's, going to maybe perform well this week, I think we want somebody who's pretty accurate, but obviously has the potential to make a lot of birdies. So somebody who's got a good long game. I probably the putting not so much. I don't think that's going to be that important as well. It's harder to glean too much from the stats we have on putting. It's only like putts per green in regulation, but it was slightly easier overall back in the last couple of times it was played here. So I'm not sure how much we can really take from that, but we're looking at that in conjunction with the fact that it's easier scrambling. I think you can. I will certainly be focusing on players who have better long games and the ability to make a lot of birdies, and also the more accurate players as well, which obviously ties into that.
So this could be the week for McIntyre. This could be.
Yeah.
I'll hold out hope.
Yeah.
Every week. I mean, I already put in the bet at 28-1.
I'm not betting him at 28-1. But
Oh, I did. So.
I will be rooting for him, however, though.
From a beyond standpoint, so we look like last year we saw two kind of special wins. We saw Lee Westwood once again get a victory for quite some time when he was at the NetBank Golf Challenge last year, and then really Danny Willett came back full circle from his Masters victory at the DP World Championship last year. Who would you expect if you had to look at kind of the top of the board, so to say, that you really think is on the precipice of breaking through here in the playoffs with a win? It could be some of these young guys we've talked about, or the established guys from the contrary. But do you have any top of mind names who are peaking for you coming into those final couple tournaments?
I think obviously McIntyre is one, and I've kind of touched on Van Rooyen. I've talked about him already. He's one of the form players in the world at the minute. I was doing some research recently, and he's up there with, I think he's top 20 in terms of form since June. So it really wouldn't surprise me at all if he went and got a win. Down in South Africa would obviously be, a dream for him, I guess. But could definitely see him getting a win there. Paul Waring has come in this week. He's a little bit further down the field, but really good performance last week, and he's one I've sort of had my eye on the last 2-3 months. Really solid performances all around. So he obviously got the win last year as well, but he's been around quite a while. But I think his career has sort of hit new heights over the last couple of years. So definitely wouldn't be surprised. I think he started at like 66 or something this week, and he's down to maybe 40s or 33s.
He got bet down immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, I missed the boat on that one, unfortunately.
Pity. But yeah, he's one that, he's 201 last week with a massive price on him. And I think, if he puts in another good performance this week, he could go off pretty, much shorter price next week. So he's one, probably those two guys would be in the sort of lower to mid range. I think would be two players who I could definitely see get a win. Matt Wallace is probably always one who, it doesn't really matter how he's playing. You could never rule him out from getting the win. He's the type of player, kind of like I talked about, that him and Willett would be the two guys who, when you put them in the pressure situation, when the win is on the line, they'll generally step up and do it. So, they'd be, from a kind of different perspective, they'd be two other guys who, it just really wouldn't surprise me at all if they won from, not from nowhere, but from maybe less prominence.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, so my question would be another form guy. Can Beirne keep up his hot play since coming back from? He was injured late last year, early into this year, if I'm recalling correctly. But when he came back and won, like, he's just been on a tear as well since. I don't know how these courses necessarily fit him coming into the end of the year, but he rates out pretty well for me this week. I was wondering if he was another guy who he just seems to find it out of nowhere as well. Like in a round or two, he just goes low, and all of a sudden Beirne is threatening for the win.
Yeah, he'd be one actually. He fits. Just had a look there at Gary Player Country Club, and I think he's like the 6th best fit in terms of the field for the course there. So definitely he could keep it up. I did some projections earlier on the race to Dubai, and I'm actually making him 58% to win it outright. So it's early days on that, but I think there's some decent prices on. I think there's odds against available on him for that. So I think that's probably worth looking at from my point of view anyway. So but some of that is due to the fact that he's playing this week, and Lowry isn't due to play next week, and Rahm isn't down to play either. So but yeah, I mean, next week could be a good week for him. I think it probably is the best fit of the last 3 at the Nedbank. So that's where I'd be keeping an eye on him. But overall, I just think he's. I think the best value would probably be on him to win the race to Dubai at this stage.
Yeah, I was curious how that affected it, because just looking at the early entries into next week, bringing in guys we talked about like Fitzpatrick, I see Fleetwood's on the list, Oosthuizen. So I was curious how that may, if it's a huge boost, or if I should have looked myself and I didn't, if it is a big enough boost to actually an advantage to playing this week and not jumping in with just 2 to go as far as winning the title.
Yeah, I would say playing more is better for those guys. To be honest, like at this stage, I think, they're so good. Sometimes what we'll do is we look at like expected points, for an event. And when you look at, if you kind of consider the impact of maybe not playing next week, might be a little bit fresher for the final, the final event or whatever. But I think overall, that's negated by the missed opportunity in terms of the average number of points that they'll win from actually playing, if that makes sense. So, I think for me, I'd be saying they should definitely play. But he looks like he's in good shape for next week. And I mean, injury wise, I think there hasn't been any sign of that since he came back, which is really, it's really good that he's obviously managed his rehab and his physio really well in the early part of the year to make sure that when he did come back, he was 100%. And he's been probably 110% over the last 6 months or so. But it's good to see. And I think, heading into the Ryder Cup next year, I think he's he's got real potential to be on the team, and it'd be great to see him playing as well as he can.
Yeah, he hurt me quite a bit when he came back. He came back way better than I had anticipated, and I had picked on him a little bit in some head-to-heads and such, and yeah, to my disdain, and he just kept playing well. So I just didn't remember that burn from before even, so that was just impressive to me, and I'm a fan, so I was
He was actually, I think I remember looking before, he was ranked quite highly. I remember being surprised that I think he might have been top 20 in the world at one stage before his injury. Yeah, I was surprised by that he was that high. I think he might have been up there with like one of the highest ranked players to not play a Ryder Cup or something like that.
I just remember he used to get into the majors, and he was one of those Euro guys who I'd try to leverage in DraftKings for less ownership because no one knew who he was. And he'd be rated pretty high in the world rankings, and he just kind of seemed to always fizzle out. Maybe that's just me remembering the bad times. I don't know.
But, yeah, it looks like he got to 22nd. So he's 24th right now, and his best ever was 22nd. So then you factor in when he continues to play in that time missed. Yeah, he's going to break into the top 20 in the world. Amazing.
Yeah, he's a good player.
So yeah, Sky, unless you have anything else to, we'll let Dylan get out of here. I know he stayed up late once again. We thank you for joining. Like you said, it's a great time of year. We're trying to get more and more people, especially our listeners, to join in the fun that is the Euro Tour and early morning golf stateside. I mean, there's nothing better waking up on the weekend, and you just click on the TV, get some Euro Tour in before the PGA even tees off. So.
No, I definitely appreciate this, Dylan, and would love to do this again in the future. Prior to some large events like the majors or the Magical Kenya Open. Some really, really big events that we have in the future. So thank you so much, Dylan.
Yeah. Let's talk ahead of the 5 majors next year.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Once again, thank you very much, Dylan, for joining us. Listeners, again, if you don't follow him, you can find him at Dylan_Beirne. You can find myself on Twitter at FantasyJesusDFS. Sky is part of Golf Savages 2 on Twitter. And if you would like more reference material for this specific week, you can always go to fantasygolfbag.com, become a premium member, and get access to all of the European Tour strokes gain stats that we have been accumulating, and we have them in the same format as our PGA Tour stats with our strokes gain snapshot, 5T, 10T, and the entire season. Hopefully we see those bagger avatars at the top of all the GPPs, and good luck everybody this week.